Good morning, Trump's family. Have a great Friday, everyone, and God bless you. Thank you for always watching and subscribing to the channel. Alright, without further ado, let's get into the news. The FBI just got caught spying on Americans yet again, and this time, it's on conservative Catholics. We're gonna see the bombshell hearings where the Attorney General is doing everything he can to run away from all of this. And we're going to see precisely how conservative Catholics are rising up and ending this lawless regime once and for all. A few weeks back, a bombshell whistleblower report came out, revealing that the FBI's Richmond field office recently released an internal memo warning against what they called radical traditionalist Catholic ideology. The document was exposed by a special agent at the Bureau for 6 years before he was indefinitely suspended. That appears to be the pattern that the FBI engages in with whistleblowers, and it claims that traditionalist Catholic parishes and groups are breeding grounds for white supremacist. Attorney General Merrick Garland was brought to Capitol Hill today to testify regarding these explosive accusations. I don't know the answer. I don't know how many FBI spies are in Catholic parishes right now across the country. Attorney General, I don't know. The default answer: the permanent political class, where the number one rule is always avoid accountability. Now Senator Josh Hawley brought up the SPLC, the Southern Poverty Law Center, as the source for targeting traditionalist Catholics as a hate group. Unfortunately, the FBI, as Senator Hawley noted, the SPLC has been thoroughly discredited. Even USA Today has referred to the SPLC as, in their words, a scam. The SPLC is perhaps more than any other organization turned grievance politics into an industry, and a very lucrative one at that. The SPLC rakes in tens of millions of dollars a year smearing conservative organizations and causes, and unfortunately now, conservative Catholics. It's proof that the left's grievance groups know no bounds in terms of their politics of destruction, and they'll go after even members of the Catholic Church. But besides that, we all know what's really going on here. It's the exact same thing we saw happening with parents protesting their woke school boards. As many of you all too well remember, several months back, it was revealed that the Department of Justice launched an all-out effort to combat what they claimed was an increase in threats of violence against school officials and teachers all across the country. It was in response to a request by the National School Boards Association. This National School Boards Association requested that the Patriot Act, which is an act that involves dealing with domestic terrorists, they actually requested the Patriot Act be enforced against threatening parents, supposedly threatening, and the Justice Department basically said, okay, all right. Well, we'll do that. Matt Walsh at the time tweeted out, and leftist activists can come to your house, would bullhorns film you in the bathroom, loot your business, burn police stations, the FBI does nothing. But if conservative parents raise their voices at a school board meeting, as by the way, Matt Walsh has done relatively recently, they're hunted down as terrorists. The law is dead, and he's absolutely right. We're gonna find out exactly what Biden and the Democrats are doing here, and it's gonna make your blood boil. What Biden Democrats are doing here, either with traditional Catholic parishes or parents pushing back against woke school boards, as something scholars refer to as weaponized legalism. That's the technical term for the political causation of the law. Weaponized legalism. A weaponized legal regime which you and I now live under, right, and thanks to bumbling Biden, uses the law to deliberately undermine their political opponents, strengthen themselves and their allies, and they use the law to show off their power, to threaten and intimidate, and that's precisely what the Justice Department has become. They become weaponized legal regime that uses the law as a political weapon. So for example, Democrats care nothing about enforcing immigration law at the southern border. But they care everything about busing immigrants from Florida to New York. They don't give a rip about their law enforcement responsibilities during the George Floyd riots, but are now suddenly the great defenders of the nation against these January 6th inside connectionists. This is weaponized legalism. It's the intentional use of the law to persecute your political opponents and intimidate everyone else, all the while securing your own position of power. But the joke's on them. The amazing news at all of this is that traditionalist Catholics are rising up against this nonsense like never before. As it turns out, traditionalist Catholic parishes, particularly ones celebrating the Latin Mass, are growing by leaps and bounds, even as contemporary Catholic parishes are generally shrinking. One Los Angeles parish that introduced the Latin Mass saw their parish double in attendance in a single year. And I would argue it's all part of this wider phenomenon known as re-traditionalism nation, where more and more populations are returning the nation culture, custom and tradition, most particularly our religious traditions, as mechanisms of resistance against liberal globalism and its anti-cultural secular aristocracy. Catholicism is no exception to this wider trend. And so as the Biden Justice Department tries to clamp down on traditional Catholics, they're quickly finding themselves tangling with a very formidable and indeed growing foe. And then this is some big news. That's none other than the petulant teen Greta Thunberg being carried away from her latest protest. Look at those vultures in the legacy media. Their patron saint is being persecuted. Wait until you find out what she's protesting. Now, it not only exposes her for what she really is, it's a masterclass in precisely why the worldwide left is imploding. As we speak, you think about shutting down in a weakened state. Greta Thunberg is in the news. Once again. She was briefly detained by Norwegian police during a demonstration in Oslo. Watch what she protesting against, you may ask. Well, if you could believe that she was actually protesting wind farms. Now you probably know that wind farms are basically the heart of green energy, and we were always led to believe that Greta is not merely a climate activist, she is actually the patron saint of green energy. So how on earth can the patron saint of all things green be protesting against wind farms, you ask? Well, she's taken up a new cause. She is now an advocate for the Sami people, an indigenous people group in Norway. And as it turns out, the Norwegian Supreme Court about a year ago ruled against the use of the wind turbines in the Fosen region of western Norway, where Sami families practice their culture of reindeer husbandry. However, the Norwegian government has yet to enforce that ruling. So Greta and her human rights cohort are protesting the continued operation of wind farms. Now, if your cynicism radar happens to suspect that this is nothing more than an attention-seeking stunt on the part of Greta, you're not alone. One of the reasons why you saw those vultures in the media surrounds us precisely because she is the creation of the media. We did a video exposing that years ago. Greta Thunberg is the intentional, deliberate fabrication of the worldwide legacy media. The Daily Caller originally broke the story back in November 2019 when members of the global media gathered at Columbia University School of Journalism to collaborate on how they would cover the so-called climate crisis, leading up to that year's United Nations Climate Conference. According to the Daily Caller, over 250 news outlets and journalists partnered with Columbia University's School of Journalism to intentionally shape and control the narrative for what they consider to be a global climate crisis. And as the Daily Caller notes, this coordinated activism among the legacy media intentionally fabricated a hero, a megastar, a saint, to carry their message of climate alarmism to the masses. Not, of course, was none other than the then 16-year-old Swedish climate activist named Greta Thunberg. You see, the whole purpose of lionizing Greta was to galvanize American support for the radical policies being advocated by environmental activists, which of course means that we're not looking at news. We're staring straight in the face of blatant left-wing environmentalist propaganda, and all climax with Greta getting Time magazine's Person of the Year. However, Greta appears to be the victim of her own success, who said the world has changed dramatically since her infamous Holiday U speech at the UN Climate Conference in 2019. The problem for the Greta cult, of course, is that Europe has largely adopted what Saint Greta has been advocating these last few years. In fact, much of the world took credit advice, particularly Sri Lanka. They turned their backs on fossil fuels, manufactured fertilizers and the like. And now, of course, Sri Lanka in particular, their world has fallen apart. Europe as we speak is going through a cost of living crisis likes which they haven't seen in decades. So now, starving for that attention she's apparently become addicted to, but also recognizing that green energy ain't as popular as it used to be given the cost of living crisis. Greta is now protesting, if you can believe it. She's now protesting the very green energy that she originally advocated. I mean, can't make this stuff up? Well, maybe you can. Certainly the media has been doing precisely that with Saint Greta. But seriously, she's taken up a new cause, the cause of indigenous people's rights, and that cause, the indigenous people's rights, has pitted Greta again since the very environmental and green energy endeavors that she herself publicly demanded. Now this is, to me, it's so key in understanding why the worldwide left is imploding. It's precisely because the modern woke leftists entail their own defeat. Actually, scholars have calling this a performative contradiction. The left is inescapably self-defeating, and that self-negation is destroying them. It inevitably causes them to war against themselves. The key to understanding why the left is imploding is understanding the nature of what we commonly refer to as identity politics. Scholars do indeed include environmentalism as part of identity politics as part of the group to which one self-consciously belongs. The key to understanding identity politics is how they divide up Western society into two fundamental identities, two fundamental groups of people, a victimizer group and a victim group, and oppressor and oppressed. The oppressor group is assumed to be monolithic. So in our case, the oppressor group is made up of white male Christians. The oppressed group is a coalition of minority identities, who together ultimately create a majority of minorities, as it were, whose ultimate goal is to overthrow the majority in terms of who has ultimate political power. The key here is that what binds these various identities together into a single political coalition is their shared victimhood. They're all victims of some kind of political and social oppression. So you have this appearance of unity that lasts for a time, especially when the cameras or the fawning legacy media are all around you. But what's the long-term problem with all of this? The problem's that, as it turns out, each of these identities actually have competing political interests. We saw this most explicitly of late in Dearborn, Michigan. This was seen some weeks back at the local school board meeting. Dearborn happens to be the most densely Muslim-populated area in the United States. And when these parents got word of books involving explicit LGBT content being given to their kids, this was the result. Now keep in mind, this was happening one of the bluest of the blue districts in the nation. Dearborn votes 70% Democrat, and this district that votes 70% Democrat is rising up and pushing back against one of the other major constituencies of the Democratic Party. And that, of course, in this case, is the LGBT community. And this is exactly what's happening with Greta. Greta simply found a new cause, indigenous peoples advocacy, but that new cause is now pitting her against her old cause, green energy. This is the inherent contradiction at the heart of woke identity politics. Identity politics assembles a coalition of the aggrieved together who inevitably act on competing political interests. And so identity politics ultimately does have its own inherent polarization and balkanization. So thank you, Greta, for this masterclass in the futility of woke leftism. We've learned a lot. Now, you really can just go away. Thank you very much. WWG1WGA. Give me your thoughts below and hit subscribe.